guys, you could have gone to any of these and you came here, so that's really special. Thank you, everybody. I think it's exactly, well, it's 9:59. It says here, I don't know. Move it like 20 more seconds, let's say. My parents are actually coming. They're on their way. They saw my second, so I'll give them a second. But yeah, it's really, really cool. Everyone's here. That's awesome, and they should be here in a second. And yeah, thank you everybody for coming. I want to give you a quick note. I wrote in the description, if you read the description, about some like technical topics. I was going to talk about signed distance functions and stuff. As I was preparing all this, it's a little more like try to be inspirational than getting in the weeds with the code. So I ended, you might see slight variation from the description just in terms of how much time spent on like distance functions versus other stuff, just to be aware of. I think I will begin. Yeah, okay. Oh, I have to just record button. I'm supposed to, it's red, look at that. All right, we're recording, this is happening. Hello everybody, welcome to Paint by Pixel, Introduction to Procedural Art for WebGL and Fragment Shaders. Now, don't worry if you don't know what a fragment shader is or what WebGL is, or even if you're vaguely familiar. I also didn't know before you learn things. But the goal of this talk really is to hopefully show a form of art that's captivating and interesting, and we should leave here today with realizing how accessible it is. It's not that hard, even though it's going to look complex. So, getting right into it, the mind's eye. So we're going to take it back to the early 1990s before we get into anything. It was one evening, a Blockbuster night. I was around 10 years old, and my parents, who are on their way in any minute now, they brought home a movie, but it wasn't really a movie. It was more of a collection of digital art. There was a camera panning around colorful shapes. It was all set to music. I did some searching when I was preparing this, and I'm pretty sure what we watched was called The Mind's Eye. There's some music. It was released on September 25th, 1990. It was described as the first effort by director and co-producer Jan Nickman and Steve Churchill, which served as a demonstration of computer animation when the art form was still in its relative infancy. And this was probably the first time that I had seen computer-generated graphics like this. I mean, how'd they do that? It's like 1990. I will note, I was no stranger to computer-generated art back then, having dabbled in AppleSoft Basic, making drawings on the Apple IIe. These are some of the things I made. But complex 3D shapes with lighting and reflections, and a whole movie of it. I didn't realize this was even possible. Keep in mind this was before the internet as we know it today. So, throughout the 1990s, we of course saw computer animation and motion pictures, things like Terminator and Toy Story and Jurassic Park, and many others pushed the limit of what's possible in computers to make complex 3D shapes and things. But quietly, and unbeknownst to me, for then and still going on today, there's something called demo scene. So demo scene. Just quoting this little article here, it was this powered by the rise of affordable and capable home computers. The demo scene became history's first widespread computer art movement. The scene, which emerged from early communities of software pirates, involved the creation of elaborate, hardware-intensive audiovisual productions that bring hackers, musicians, and graphics wizards together, blurring the lines between artist and programmer, amateur and professional. So this was going on in the 1980s, 1990s, and even continues today. But yeah, so part of the challenge of making these demos was that they were often constrained to a hard limit of either 64 kilobytes or even as low as 1 kilobyte. These limits formerly existed just due to the constraints of the hardware that they were developed on. You think of like Commodore 64. Although they remain in place today just to keep the art form alive. So, this right here, this demo is called Star Traveler. It's under a kilobyte. It's written in JavaScript. You can check it. I think the address is there. Anyway, it's been minified so it fits in the size constraint. But just to give an idea, like 1 kilobyte, that's 1,000 characters of text, 200 words, 12 average length sentences. So in just 12 average length sentences can make a whole scene of flying through some water into space. Just 12 sentences worth of data. And this is this idea. You start with a constraint, and then you make art inside that constraint. And this is similar when you think of like haikus, song lyrics. I actually realized there's a lecture tomorrow called Creativity Within Constraints, so that's just a nice coincidence. But this is the idea, you have a constraint, in this case, size, number of kilobytes. So it's now 2023, and while demo scene does still exist, there's also other ways to make procedural art. In particular, I want to introduce everybody now to ShaderToy. You might have heard of it. Is ShaderToy the new demo scene? It can be debated elsewhere, as shown in this thread. But basically, it's a site that lets people display animated computer art that they made, and it's so easily viewable. You can just open up a web browser, you click on any project, you can watch, you can modify numbers and see what happens. Just go in and start playing with it. Now, some of the demos are interactive. They have mouse and keyboard input. And there's lots of other interesting art projects that are written in all relatively small amounts of code. Hello, come on in. We're just talking about computer art. Now, the language is GLSL, shader language. We'll talk all about that. We're going to get to it. I just want to add, you don't need ShaderToy to render these sorts of things. Anything, all the stuff we're going to show you can be done in simple JavaScript. You can set this up. It's really, really simple. I'm going to show you all that stuff when we get to the end. These are just different ways of making procedural art. Now, procedural art, what's that? Well, right, because, maybe that's the first time we're hearing the word procedural art. There's different ways to define it. One paper I saw that defines it as artwork defined by a computationally represented system of rules, relationships, and behaviors. It enables the creation of works that are flexible, adaptable, and capable of systematic revision. I would kind of put it in my own words, dynamic art, where components are dependent on each other. The interesting thing with this sort of art is the artist doesn't know what's going to come out necessarily. In particular, the artist does not have the computing power in their brain to see what the final product will be, even if they intellectually can describe the math, the formulas behind it. And so they need to write these formulas or functions and allow a computer to display the finished result. And they and the rest of the world can see this picture for the first time, whatever that might look like. This mesmerizing video playing here is a simple Mandelbrot set. It's a very simple fractal, one of the more basic fractals, a few lines of code, just scaling with some interesting colors and patterns. And the formula is simple, but I don't think anybody can envision in their mind what it's going to look like when you plug in some numbers. So that's just an example. And all the more so when there's multiple components with these complex shapes interacting with each other. Now we're going to get into some basics of rendering art in a fragment shader, in particular inside a quad. Here we go. So rendering in a quad. I talked about constraints before. So we're going to talk about this constraint of rendering in a quad. What's a quad? Short for quadrilateral. It's a rectangle where the art will go, frame. It has a width and a height, and there's a formula for deciding the color for every position in it. So we're going to be working on a quad that's rendered on WebGL. So WebGL, what's that? Well, GL, graphics library, for the web browser. It's found in modern web browsers like Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Edge. And it's a graphics library that's somewhat simplified version compared to like OpenGL, compared to like the sort of things that you might see like, big games made in. It's still very powerful, but some of its limitations help keep it so that cross-compatibility, so it can run in different web browsers. It essentially provides an interface to allow a developer to access the GPU, that's the graphics processing unit, to do interesting and rather complex things by providing a program consisting of these shaders and textures and other resources through the convenience and compatibility of good old JavaScript. So a simplified WebGL graphics pipeline is shown on the slide. We have these attributes or uniforms, things that are passed in from the outside the program. Just variables, a number, a color, a time. And then we have the vertex shader where these polygons are typically rendered. So you think of like an old PlayStation game, or this teacup over here. Notice how you see these vertices on the 3D model clearly. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but that things look so blocky. But ultimately, the vertex shader is figuring out where to draw those polygons and then rendering them to the screen. Finally, is the fragment shader. This is where the polygons are painted pixel by pixel, and think of it like a function that takes some position, x, y, and just returns a color. That's it. For this position, draw this color. That's all it does. So for our sake, we're not concerned with anything but the fragment shader. We're going to have the vertex shader render a simple quad, just a mesh of two triangles that makes a square or a rectangle, and two right triangles, I should say, and have the fragment shader do all the work of the rendering. Now, the main constraint of rendering art in a fragment shader is we're not relying on the vertex shader to do any of the 3D modeling. Instead, we're doing everything inside this quad. And we're forced to use mathematical functions to efficiently draw 2D and even 3D shapes. So, like that teapot down there is rendered in a fragment shader, for example. And the result of this constraint is we actually have more freedom to generate smooth curves as opposed to these, stuck in a world of triangles. To be clear, we can also draw triangles. We can draw anything that can be described with a mathematical function. Including three-dimensional shapes, patterns, pretty much anything. The challenge comes in finding ways to do this efficiently. And the paradigm shift is in how we view the design that we ultimately want to make. So, a painter might think of like what canvas and brushes and paints to use, whereas like a digital artist who imagines a particular scene to render in a fragment shader will think about what mathematical functions can be used to, envision the world around them or whatever imaginary world they want to create. So, speaking of rendering triangles and smooth curves, here's a very simple demo I made. Mathematical functions can be used to make interesting designs that look, well, mathematical, like what's playing right there. But they also can be used to make artwork like this. I did not make that. That is called Selfie Girl. It's by a digital artist called Inigo Quiles. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. Inigo Quiles. And he's a mathematician and artist who teaches how to make this kind of art through his YouTube channel and website. So like the art that you see there, it too, his artwork is the result of, as he describes, high school mathematics. So, among the things that can be rendered with pure mathematics are fractals, line art, patterns, but also photorealistic images through the use of random noise functions, ray marching, all sorts of advanced things to render complex 3D shapes. You can really make like some cool stuff. It's just, a bunch of mathematical functions all put together for both things. So just to realize. Okay, we're going to now go into a very simple example. We're just going to look for maybe our first time at some GLSL graphic shader shading language code. Sorry, graphics library shading language code. So this is the fragment shader. Like, it can be run on ShaderToy or in your web browser or anything. We're just going to go through it line by line. We have the first line, main image. This is declaring a function called main image, and this is what's going to get executed. It has an input, which is the frag coord, that's the coordinates, an XY position coordinate, and then output a frag color, which is an RGBA color, so red, blue, green, and alpha, which doesn't really get used, but is still part of the output. So to be clear, this is something that's going to run on every single pixel here, 60 frames a second, and it's going to get run over and over for each one. And that might, immediately, if you think of it, might seem really inefficient if you think about doing work on a CPU, if you've ever done sort of sequential programming, you wouldn't start redeclaring variables, especially things can get really complex. Whole different world in the GPU. The GPU, all our computers, phones have it. It's like this massively parallel supercomputer in a way. And it is actually more efficient to do things in parallel, even if it means redeclaring some variables. It handles that okay. But yeah, it's just all about literally you do the same thing for each pixel, but the only thing that changes is the input, namely the coordinate, the position. Okay, so next we have on line 4, over here we get the normalized value between 0 and 1. So we're getting, let me see how yeah, so it's common to normalize this as a first step before doing any math. We call the variable UV just by convention. Sometimes it's called ST. You'll see debates online about that. But anyway, sometimes it is additionally multiplied by a proportion of the width versus height to ensure that the dimensions are not warped by an aspect ratio. We're not doing that now. We will do that in a few slides. But and you see where it says vec2 and vec4 above. These are all different ways to declare a vector. So you can have float, vec2, vec3, and vec4, and that's it. The GPU is very specific. They can think of it like an array of numbers up to size 4. And this is just how these numbers get packed together. So vec2 is going to give us an XY position. And vec4 would of course give us 4 values, which can also be RGB, A. Okay, and also important to note that I resolution value, that's a uniform. That's being passed in from the outside. So we don't see here where it's being passed in, but we can take for granted that the program that's running this is accurately giving us that value of the size of the whole thing. So ultimately now, UV is filled with a number between 0 and 1 for X and Y, depending on the position we're working on. We then move on to the color. This line 6, yes. And we're setting the color to a vector of size 3. There's this nice convention where you can just set it once and it kind of fills for all the values. So that's like R, G, and B. Red, blue, and green are all going to be that color. And what that's ultimately doing is, so you see, it's kind of faint, but from 0 to 1, basically we're saying whatever the Y position is, color it that. So in the case of 0, 0. In the case of 1, 1, and everything in between is something in between those two values. And finally, we set this frag color on line 9. And note that the final value of 1, that's just the alpha. By convention, it's always going to be 1. Okay, so we're going to try changing things now. It's going to start getting interesting. So you see UVY, right? What would happen if we changed it to UV.x? Any ideas what it might look like? Yeah.
Gradient from left to right or right to left.
You got it, and there it is, UVX, and now it's from left to right. Yeah. So cool. So now, what if we start mixing things up with the colors? What if we use X for the red channel and Y for the green channel, and just set the blue channel to 1? Any ideas what it might look like? We'll go for it. Here it is. So now we start to get some neat colors. You can kind of see how the X dimension is what's happening. The red, it kind of goes from not red to more red. Blue is everywhere, and green is from top to bottom. It all kind of mixes together. Cool. All right, now just notice I kind of did UVX, UVY. We can actually combine those. This is a nice little convention because it automatically will unwrap that value. So we'll leave it like that. Now we're going to try to make things interesting. So you might remember, these trigonometry functions like sine, cosine from high school and beyond or before. So these are periodic functions. So let's just repeat some value forever. So we're going to try and make one small change. We're going to take line 6 and wrap that UV there, that XY position, in a sine function, which will also spread. Not much of a difference. Barely changed. Let's think about what the sine function does. Take some value and output something between -1 and 1. And it, period between, I think, -pi and pi, or 2pi. Anyway, we're not anywhere near the period that a sine function needs to operate in, because we have all our values normalized between 0 and 1. So that's not going to give us anything interesting. To make it interesting, we have to decrease the period of the sine function. And we do that by adding a coefficient. Basically just a multiplier inside those parentheses. So what if we tried 30? Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Getting a little interesting. Plaid, you know, everyone likes plaid. We're repeating a pattern that's produced by sine waves in the xy. And you know, we have this multiplier of 30, which decrease the period, or I guess increase the period. It makes more waves. And the frequency, increase the frequency. So basically, yeah, now we actually have a pattern. And just, you know, something worth noting, we are technically going below 0, so there's clipping, but it's not really an issue because anything below 0 just goes to 0 for colored values. Any questions so far before I move on? Is this?
You said this is done in JavaScript, right?
Well, JavaScript is executing the GLSL code.
Okay.
So that's being passed in ultimately to JavaScript. But this is a language of its own.
Okay.
Cool. Okay, so remember how line 4 I talked about how it normalizes positions, and we can make, let's say we want things to look a little more square. What we're gonna do is normalize that value. So now, ultimately, basically what we're doing is we're setting the midpoint in the center, and we're normalizing the aspect ratio. So the right and left side go a little greater than 1 and -1, or -0.5 and 0.5. But you know, things are centered and we still have normalized values otherwise. So that looks better. But where can we go from here now that we have you know, something interesting going on? Well, we can add a multiplier after that UV, that XY coordinate in the sine function. So remember how it controls the size, right? We have this multiplier 30. So what if we took a distance function that just said, let's take any, you know, distance from the center. We already know the center is 0, 0. Take the distance from it and multiply whatever that value is by what's inside here. So any guesses what that might look like?
Spherical scaling?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, spherical scaling, kind of like a fisheye. We're going to go for it. Yeah, Pythagorean theorem. So we're going to use a length function that will give us the Pythagorean theorem to give us the distance from the center. And yes, kind of like a fisheye or a spherical thing, just like you predicted. Cool. Yeah. So now we're going to finish up this little exercise by adding some animation. We mentioned we have the eye resolution uniform that's being passed in from the outside. These special variables are called uniforms, and they're given to the shader program. They can be anything from user input, like a key press or mouse cursor position or some user setting. But another major one that's commonly used is called time. Shader Toy calls it eye time, kind of like eye resolution. This is how their convention. You can call it anything, but that's what they call it. So it's just a floating point value that represents time. And you know, remember, we have this periodic function sine, so anything we put in it will just kind of get, end up between -1 and 1. So, what if we just put a time variable straight in there, and we get nice animation, that's it. All we did was add this multiplier. I did 4 times eye time, why not 3 or 5? Because 4 looked like a good speed. If I made it 5, it would go a little faster, 3 a little slower. Just, you know, a multiplier to make it at a nice pace. And that's, you know, where it becomes like an artist, you know, artists might start tweaking things if they want something to look a certain way. So, you know, I hope we can just kind of see with this small example, it's not a lot of code, we can like really appreciate how we can do a lot of cool stuff with some basic math functions and just experimenting, playing around. But just, you know, to try one more thing, because, you know, it's all about experimenting and seeing what happens. What if we change that multiplier of 30 to, I don't know, 8,000? You know, remember that multiplier controls the period of the sine function. So if we have a really high multiplier, that plaid pattern is going to get really tiny. So essentially, we're fitting this thing in a smaller space. So let's just see what happens. And cool. We made a Moyer pattern. You know, the beauty in procedural art is a creative process. You know, you truly don't know what's going to emerge just by changing one number. It should also be observed that despite rendering a much more intricate pattern than we saw before, it's not really doing anything different from the computer. It's, you know, it's the same math. It's just one different number. And again, you know, let's just reflect on how this is the result of what's essentially one line of code. Line 7, executing a relatively straightforward formula for every pixel. We get some really cool art. There's the, made that thing pop up. Anyway, so let's just talk about what's going on now for a single pixel. Here we go, the journey of a pixel. So, you know, thinking about how to make a particular design from the perspective of what formula or code will describe everything here. This is a paradigm shift from how art is typically made. You know, let's take this example of YouTube sketch artist, John Harris, drawing a set of squares to make a spiral. In his video, he's focusing on rendering one square at a time, really one line at a time. He might be thinking about what the finished product's going to look like, but based on where his pen is going, he's very clearly drawing each thing sequentially. You know, he's not thinking of, you know, drawing the whole thing in one go. We can cut to the end of the video and we see that he makes a pretty cool design drawing these spiraling squares. And he starts shading them. So let's take a look at a similar pattern that was rendered in a fragment shader. So here, this is a little design I made to do what's essentially happening there. Except every pixel has the code that will calculate the distance from its position to every other line shown. So, you know, this has to know where everything is. This has to know, every pixel has to know where everything is. And then it has to answer the question, do I lie on that design or not? And if it doesn't, it's black. If it does, it's white. And if it's somewhere in between, you know, it's gray, like the, you know, if it's not quite one or the other. So, you know, these calculations are happening in real time. You can just appreciate that, you know, and you know, even so much so that it can actually be animated. You know, you can't do that with the pen drawing. It's really cool pen drawing, that's it. You know, but yeah, just the ability to actually render these things in real time. And not only that, but the pattern can actually be repeated with a simple modulus function, just adding one function, but no other work. Otherwise, we can now take that little square pattern and just repeat it across the whole screen. Looks kind of cool. And you know, just this whole thing is less than 350 characters of code. I actually submitted it to Shader Toy, and my design was actually like over 1,000 lines, but then somebody on Shader Toy, because they like to tinker, somebody actually reduced it to under 350 lines. Wow, that's so cool. So under 350 lines is drawing all of this, and each pixel is calculating where everything else is, the whole function, to know, you know, where it lies and if it's one or the other. Crazy. Cool. So yeah, so let's just look at another example now. This is called Snail. It's also by Inogo Quiles, the same artist who did Selfie Girl from the previous slide, a few slides ago. So the code, again, for rendering every pixel of that leaf is the same code that renders the snail. It's all just one mathematical formula in, you know, high school math, as Inogo would call it. So, you know, I can't help but think this is kind of similar to a gene, you know? Our cells contain the same DNA, the same genetic code. Of course, which genes are expressed depends on what sort of cell and where that cell is in the body, but it's the same formula, you know? Your big toe and an eyeball have the same genetic code, but just expressed differently. You know, and certain genes are activated under certain conditions. So, you know, somebody can think of like a single fragment or pixel positioned on the screen as the condition that activates a part of the formula that renders a particular color, but the whole formula is there. And the part, you know, the part contains the whole. So let's just reflect on that. You know, the whole idea that the part contains the whole. And now I think we can get practical. So just, I wanted to talk about how we can get started with fragment shaders. You know, you go home, this is over and you want to get started. So just to be clear, everything we're doing can be done in pure JavaScript. Literally, the boilerplate to do all of it is right there. And I want to emphasize just that you don't need a special library or any kind of, you don't need shader toy or editors. You just need that little bit of boilerplate, which you can, probably find on GitHub or elsewhere. If you know basic JavaScript syntax and you are comfortable with reading the documentation for special GL context methods, you can understand what this is doing. And then you just add your fragment shader somewhere up top or in another file, and you're good. The nice thing about this is you can, you have a good degree of control over what's happening. The result is portable. You don't need other dependencies. But let's just say you want to just make some art. You don't want to do this. I just wanted to show everyone it's possible. You don't want to deal with setting up a boilerplate. So you have lots of options actually. First of all, I don't know if those are familiar with VS Code. But if you've used VS Code before, you will be happy to know there's a plugin that lets you start working with fragment shaders today. It's interactive, it's responding to mouse position, and updates a time uniform. There's documentation and other nice to haves that give you even trailing mouse positions. You can do some cool stuff with that. And it's just literally you add the extension or plugin, and you start writing your code. This is a simple Julia set, another fractal set, kind of like the Mandelbrot set. Just in this video shows I'm literally making live changes, and I can see it. Well, the video stopped, but that's what was happening. So cool. And then another great example, great place to do this kind of stuff is, if you're on the go, you don't have VS Code available, but you just have a laptop or even your phone, you can go to editor.thebookofshaders.com. It's a built-in editor, kind of similar to the VS Code interface where you got that live, you can make live changes. And it's also a great website. I'll talk about the website a little bit too, but the website, The Book of Shaders, is an excellent resource. It has all these clear tutorials that show you how you can take basic math skills and turn them into the ability to paint with math. It's unfortunately unfinished, but it gets pretty advanced. It's been in an unfinished state for over 5 years. But you can, if you get to the point that's unfinished, you're good, And one of the downsides is saving. You can always export, but you can't just save things easily. You might lose something if you close the browser window. But the upside is if you ever have an idea, I just want to try this thing and see what happens if I change this number, it's there, it's always available, and you don't need it. You just need an internet connection. So there you go. And then finally, of course, Shader Toy, which I spoke about at the beginning and a couple times in here. This is the website where people are sharing all sorts of interesting art every day. They're sharing clever ideas for new and more efficient mathematical ways to express shapes. And this is really the learning tool for just trying things. I'm showing the same fractal over there. It also has a nice built-in editor, and has support for imported textures and other niceties like webcam input. You can do lots of really cool stuff, and just seeing what other people are doing there is pretty inspiring. There's also, I found a little thing, if you click on the compile thing, it actually shows you the compiled GPU assembly, which is pretty cool. And you can, I also learned you can press Option or Alt Enter to recompile it. It's a nice little shortcut, so you don't have to click the button every time. So yeah, this is another nice one. Also, yeah, only upvotes, no downloads. It's a very encouraging, supportive community. Cool. So yeah, and then more resources, things you might want to know to get started. If you're looking to get started, I highly recommend, again, bookofshaders.com. It's interactive and slowly takes the reader through these easy to understand mathematical concepts and how it can all be put together. A great resource for interactive visual learners, if you don't mind doing some reading. But there's actually interactive examples literally in the website, so pretty cool. If you are more of a purely visual learner, I would recommend the YouTube videos of Inogo Quiles. Some of them are very, very advanced. They can almost be a little overwhelmingly advanced, but I would recommend you start with these two. There's the basics of painting with maths. It's amazing. He takes you through, on Shader Toy, mind you, drawing that step by step. So it's nice and just really simple. It's all just oh, this is a circle. Just showing you how to essentially use these signed distance functions, which I didn't talk much about in here, but that would be the next big thing. And of course, there's a really cool one where he does painting maths with Google Sheets, where he literally shows you that you can apply the same idea of like painting by pixel in Google Sheets, because it's something where you can spread a formula across all cells. You just make the cells nice and square, and you got it. And I'd also recommend, and as you go through your journey, you're going to learn, of course, about the sign distance function, the idea that there's this function that can describe the distance of a particular shape, which could even go negative if you're inside a shape. And his website has some really good examples of sign distance functions, which as you go on this journey, it's really cool just to say, hey, I want to draw a trapezoid. And he's like, okay, I got a function for that, and here you go. So, highly recommend that stuff, and just learning. He also has YouTube videos how he derives those, which is cool math. And also, speaking of 3D shapes, well, there's also 3D shapes. I didn't mention 3D shapes, but you might also want to start rendering, three-dimensional objects with lighting and shading, and ray marching. So ray marching is like the next big thing that you might want to learn on your journey. The idea of iteratively casting a ray closer and closer to an object. And again, there's lots of really good YouTube videos. You're going to find these things. The previous slide, I actually had this. This was a really good description for me. A nice article by Michael Walczyk on ray marching. But if you have access to the slides or whatever, you can ask me after for recommendations on such stuff like that. Okay, so I think we're actually wrapping up. That's cool. So we've covered a lot. It's now time to wrap up. For those who this was a brand new topic, I hope you learned something new. And for those who are already familiar, I hope you were at least inspired or appreciated some of the ideas presented. In particular, I wanted to share how this is an art form that anybody who has access to a computer can start working in. You see these, taking it back to that first slide, I mean, it looks very overwhelming, but once you see, wow, I can do that. I can make a pattern out of plaid and make it into a 3D ball with, it's like kind of empowering, realizing we really all have access to this stuff, especially with tools today. You don't need expensive hardware or advanced computer programming skills. All you need is an imagination and willingness to try to use some of those high school math functions that you previously maybe thought were useless or boring. Try to make something new with them. So there are new projects in art that are posted regularly on Shader Toy and other places, and the possibilities really seem to be limitless. I'm finishing with these 3 images of real photographs of some things in nature that may actually be interesting projects for people to try to express as mathematical formulas in procedural art, either purely for inspiration or as an actual exercise for the determined viewer of this presentation. When we stop and realize that these and other things can be represented in a fragment shader, the GLSL code, in a single mathematical formula that describes them, we can try to envision the interconnectedness of things and try to perceive other areas where the part contains the whole. So I hope everybody feels inspired to express ourselves in our unique, it's a unique pixel coordinate that we are, and we go out and show our true colors, whether we're writing fragment shader or doing anything else. And remember the idea that art comes from a constraint. When we have that constraint, we can make something beautiful. Okay, thank you for attending. Any questions?
Could you put the slide that has the links on it?
Yes, totally. I'll leave that.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Yes.
So have you used processing?
Yes, I have.
Is GLSL similar to processing in syntax? I know it's processing.
I think it's closer to like C or C++ syntax. The syntax is almost more of its own thing. It actually has a lot of things that are specifically for GPUs that wouldn't even make sense. The notion of uniforms and attributes are, you wouldn't declare a variable like that in C or C++, but the syntax, just the way the language looks, maybe processing. I think processing is more Java-like, the way I think of it, but maybe I'm getting mixed up.
I think it is. It's been a bit since I've worked with it. It looked very similar, that's why I was wondering.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's no classes. Everything's like functional programming. It's a function, very strongly typed. Don't go adding a float with the int.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Yes.
pictures, are those are generated in code, or is he making a picture and then, is he writing the code, or is he generating the code?
He is generating the code. If you watch, I mean, I even like that, where did it go, the snail, like I know.
Like, I guess, I want to be more clear, is he writing the code by hand, or is he making a picture and then?
Oh yeah, he's writing the code. He literally, where did it go, where I had that, the snail.
The last thing.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, so he literally, I mean, this is just a fast motion, but like in a video, he actually walks through, okay, I'm going to make a function to draw a round segment, a cylinder. Now I'm going to take that top of that cylinder and bend it using another like, you can watch it, he like picks the right number, a little too high, a little too low, just right. And like, yeah, it's just all like using these primitive shapes, but there's a function for each shape. And then it's like, you take this shape and multiply it by this shape, and you get another interesting shape. And sometimes even that, like knowing when to do a multiply or when to do a min or max function or add or subtract is part of the fun of just like, okay, I have this leaf, I have this snail, what's the function that shows them both, you know? So, I mean, that's for me, when I'm like playing with this stuff, I've discovered it's not always so clear, maybe you don't know. It's like, okay, use the minimum function and it's like all looks weird, but that worked last time, and, you know? So it's a lot of experimenting. And even a lot of the stuff he's doing and what I've read and what a lot of people on Share I mean, it's like new stuff, it's new math. And some of these things they're using like theorems or, you know, formulas or things that have come out within the past 10, 15 years that mathematicians have kind of, you know, maybe seen the future a little bit, but not too much. There's still a lot to be done in this area. The idea that you can like draw a polygon using, you know, like a line, even a line segment with like a rounded edge or things like this. They're, you know, it's not so simple. You might just think, oh, I have my line drawing program and it draws, but like, how do you do that as a mathematical function? It's interesting to see how that stuff works.
Is the transparency then its own function too?
Transparency, so I don't know how he does like that drop. That is something special. I don't know how he's doing that, but he has some other demos where he actually has like a transparent jellyfish thing. It's so cool. I don't know how he is working that in, but it's all like, it's ray marching and ray tracing, not real ray tracing, isn't ray marching, but it's some variation of those things, just collecting the light of things. And also just lots of cleverness. You know, the idea like you could draw a sphere using ray marching, you could also just draw a sphere with a gradient and they're gonna look the same. So, you know, there's ways to make things look the way you want it to look, even if it's not the most physics real way. Yes?
So, over the years I've heard about things like Minecraft shaders that like make it photorealistic, realistic, or make, you know, sunbeams come down, or make the water a different kind of reflective. Are the shaders used in 3D games that people often mod, are those the same as fragment shaders?
They are, yes, it's the same idea. The only difference here is that here we are constrained to a quad. We're not like in Minecraft world, you'll have like a block or a mountain or a hill, or something like a bottle or something which already has a pre-existing shape. Here our shape is just a simple frame, but either way it's the same idea. If you want to have a, you know, some shape and have light reflecting off of it, you would still use a fragment shader.
So is it the same concept in Blender then with the shaders?
Yeah, it is. I mean, a lot of programs, yeah, Blender, Unity, in fact, the code is different in different places, but the syntax is 99% the same. I tried some playing with metal, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna have to learn a whole new thing. It's literally, I didn't do anything too advanced, it was the same. So, I don't know. I think when it gets advanced, that's when the syntax really starts to change.
Another question, do shaders so a cool effect that I've seen recently is like a Spider-Man video game. So you have these huge rectangles, and they have all these windows, hundreds of windows, and it looks like there's room inside them, but it's something called a fake interior shader. So it's not super realistic. There's no actual geometry in there, but like it's confusing how something like that would work. So can you like pass in parameters to shaders? Because I would imagine to like do something like to make a surface shimmer, depending upon perspective, you'd have to be able to pass in parameters.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yes, so we talked about the uniforms, like the resolution and the time, but you can have, or even the mouse position, but you can have, there's a lot of demos where they literally have a panel of like sliders that you can just, this parameter, that parameter.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can change them, and those are just uniforms being passed in. So in the case of that, there might be like a uniform of like, the angle that the Spider-Man, let's say, is, or the camera is pointed at the window, and based on that angle, render everything facing this way or that way.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Cool. It's exactly 10:45. Any other questions? Yes.
So when a shader uses an image map, like a bitmap, does that come in as either an attribute or one of these uniform?
Yes, it does. There's a type of uniform called a texture. There's 2D textures. There's like all different ways. And yeah, basically what happens is you fill the GPU memory with this texture. WebGPL has some hard limits on that, kind of annoyingly, because like your GPU you might have like 8 gigs, but WebGL will say no, you can only have 4 gigs or whatever. But that's just one of the limitations. But yeah. So you basically fill this texture, it's like a one shot, now the texture's filled, and then you can pick from it. And there's actually a lot of clever stuff you can do, because it doesn't just need to be image data. You can also pass in an array of numbers or anything else. Cool. Okay, thank you everybody. That's so cool. Carrots over there.
One final question.
Yes.
Did you code your shirt?
Did I code? No, okay. Yeah, thank you. Well, hey, cards, everybody. Hey, cards. These you guys know what I do. The interesting thing, I do. I'm in Shader Toy. You wanna? If you go Share Toy / I am Peck, I can't write it down. I probably should have. Pen. Thank you. And then like, oh man, this part I didn't. I'm gonna just write down. Thank you. Yeah. Why do you do that? Do you want to do something more than you want me to like write in this thing? Or phone, of course. Yeah, here we go. Cool, yeah, I'm gonna give you the number, contact, Jeff. Shader person, hopefully. There you go, cool.
I'll text you on.
Yeah, text me and I'll text you all this stuff. Cool. Yeah.
Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. All right, cool. Yeah.
I like your shirt.
Thank you. Cool, I'm so happy you made it. You said it was a conflict of 3. What a conflict.
Yeah. One got canceled. One is like from 10 to 11:45, so there's still some flex.
Oh, to 11:45.
Yeah,
Cool,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Oh, very good. Cool.
So, how you doing?
Yeah, doing good. I'm so happy this happened,
Yeah.
When I was preparing, I was like, we'll see if anyone comes, and my parents said they're coming. You said you're coming. I was like, it's just my parents and you. It's gonna be awesome. And then it was like a nice full room.
Yeah, this is interesting stuff for both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to hold on here too. I haven't
Cool.
seen you in
Oh
years.
yeah, it's been a while. Yeah.
Around today?
I'll stay around. I'll be around for like another. I head out before like 4 o'clock or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what's there?
I don't know. to turn this thing off. This is Michael McIntosh. Remember Michael McIntosh? We all worked together. Espradine.